So thank you, Ellen, for being with us, and you'll be introducing our presentation today. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm very pleased to have our presenter, Rebecca Jefferson, speak today. I think she has one of the best jobs at UF. And I say this because if you haven't been to the Judaica Library, you're missing a real treat. It's a beautiful room with lots and lots of resources, and tours are available. There's a video that's available when you go there that you can watch. And Rebecca will point out some of the more, I guess I would call them arcane resources that we've managed to collect. The presentation today will cover the how and the why of collecting Holocaust history, and it will provide an introduction to important primary resources held in the Price Library of Judaica, including records, personal archives, manuscripts, testimony, as well as anti-Semitic propaganda. I want to tell you a little bit about Rebecca. She's the curator from the Isser and Ray Price Library of Judaica at the UF. And she's a joint faculty member of the Center for Jewish Studies. She graduated from the University of Cambridge with a doctorate in medieval Hebrew, and her personal research focuses on the history of Judaica libraries and collections. And she really is an incredible person to be in charge of such a beautiful resource for UF. So with that introduction, I turn the presentation over to Rebecca.
Thank you so much, Ellen. That was a very kind introduction. I'm going to start sharing my screen so you can see my PowerPoint. Hopefully. Okay. Well, as Ellen said, I'm the curator of the Price Library of Judaica, which is a fabulous library collection, and I hope you'll get a sense of that as I go through the PowerPoint. My own scholarly background is medieval Hebrew, but my personal research interest has been the history of libraries and collections. And so that's what I'm bringing to you today. I don't have particular expertise in the Holocaust itself, but as somebody who has to manage a collection of Holocaust materials and develop that collection, that's the sort of knowledge I hope I'm bringing to you today. So for today's session, just going to do a sort of a brief overview of Holocaust collecting history, what was collected, why it was collected. You know, it's essentially collecting for the record in the beginning. And then how the collecting of Holocaust-related materials became something that was done for scholarship and education. And then that's why the Price Library of Judaica comes into this, because it is both a representative collection for Holocaust studies, and it's also a repository of special collections relating to the Holocaust. The image that you can see there that I've chosen was taken by a photographer called Richard Ehrlich. And if you get a chance, do take a look at his photography. It's all online. It's quite stunning. What he did was go to the Bad Arolsen archive in Germany and take photograph of their documents there. And it really is eye-opening, the level of documentation that was assembled from the Nazis. So Holocaust collecting really starts actually with the victims themselves. There was a sense And this goes back to an earlier period. And it started with Jewish intellectuals in Eastern Europe wanting to document what was happening prior to the Second World War with pogroms and violence against them in Eastern Europe. And they developed this sort of historical consciousness and these methods of creating questionnaires and surveys and really just gathering documents on Jewish experiences of sort of victimization prior to World War II. Then actually during World War II, this sense of the need to document experiences continued, and particularly in the Warsaw Ghetto. And it was something that was initiated by one of the community leaders called Emanuel Ringelblum. And he realized that it was really essential to start collecting everything they could relating to what was happening in the Warsaw Ghetto. And they called their archive, their secret archive, the Oneg Shabbat, because that was a term that was, which means gathering of community members on Shabbat. And if they called it that, it would remain a secret and no one could sort of discover what they were doing. And towards the end of the ghetto's existence, they started to bury the material, and they buried it in 3 parts. The first in 1942, and then another section, 2 sections in 1943. After the war, Emanuel Ringelblum sadly was murdered during the Holocaust. After the war, the archive was discovered. It took some time to find it again, but you can see the image there of them discovering it. They discovered one section in 1946 and another in 1950, and then the 3rd section has sadly never been found. And all of these documents are now in the Jewish Historical Institute in Warsaw. You can see here, this is one of our very rare periodicals in the Judaica collection. It's a periodical called Unser Wort, which means our word, and it was published in Paris by the sort of Jewish communists who were a sort of an underground movement, and it became one of the Yiddish dailies in France right through to 1996. Many of the earlier issues have disappeared, and we have actually one of these early issues, and in it they're actually documenting what is happening in the ghettos, and in this one they've got a whole full-page report on what's happening in the Vilna ghetto. So Jewish periodicals are also documenting, recording history of what's going on during the Second World War. But it's really that most of the records that started to be collected right after the war come from the Nazis themselves. And on one very sort of sick level, we have to be grateful that they were these very rigid record keepers. And when American servicemen discovered these documents and compiled them and put them together in the document center that they established in the Allied zone of Germany, they had around 30 million documents, which is incredible. And this was very important for the international military tribunals that were established by the Allies. And they dealt with over 100,000 German documents as part of those major war criminal trials. And you can see here some images of them sorting through these documents. And there, that image on the right, that's a bare little snippet of the huge files at the Bad Aronson Center, which now has 16 miles of records and artifacts from the period. Another element of collecting by the Allies was the gaining back of all the materials that the Nazis had looted during the war, and that was artworks, but also books. Millions of books looted from Jewish owners, many of them relating to Jewish history and life before the war. These were all gathered in a place called the Offenbach Archival Depot. And it was a massive operation to try and see if they could be reunited with their former owners. And when they weren't, there were efforts made to try and get them to libraries, Jewish libraries and institutions around the world. So the images you can see here, the one on the right, that's part of an album that was created by the Offenbach Archival Depot administrators when they were trying to look at all the stamps in the books and try and reunite them with their owners. So they look at the ex libris stamps or the ownership marks. The stamp that you can see next to that saying Archival Depot, Offenbach Archival Depot, we find that in quite a number of the Price Library's books. So we know when we see a book with that stamp, there's actually one that's been rescued by the Allies and that was looted by the Nazis. And this whole effort was taken over by something called the Jewish Cultural Reconstruction Group in the post-war period, as they try to get unclaimed books to libraries around the world. And similarly, in the Price Library of Judaica, you can find books with that book plate inside and know that they've come to us that way. The final image on the right, I hope you can see it okay, that's something that's in our collection. It's a Yahrzeit calendar. That means it's a calendar that was created to commemorate the anniversary of the death of this person called Sarah Wertheim. She's a German lady, clearly died in the 1930s. Interestingly, it contains the Offenbach stamp on it, but we have no idea how it reached us. We have no idea where it came from. And this is one of sort of the sad aspects of these stolen histories that very often we can trace back, and then but sometimes the trail is cold and we have no idea and we have no context for what these things are. One of the pieces in our collection comes from this relief committee that was Jewish relief committee that was established in Geneva. It was really established to help the survivors in the displaced persons camps after the war, and was to give them financial aid and legal aid. But part of that was also documentation, a lot of documentation and collecting of documents and collecting of interviews and questionnaires all took place in the displaced persons camps in Europe. And this is one of our rare pieces. It's a typescript report talking about the various concentration camps that this document writer visited and described. So it's a very important early eyewitness account. We also have in the Judaica Library something that's very special for this subject and very rare. It's called this journal is von letzten Churban, which means from the last extermination. It was a periodical that was created by survivors of the Holocaust. The editor was called Israel Kaplan. He was somebody who'd survived. He'd been in the Kovno ghetto, and he'd been in various concentration camps. And when he came out, he was determined to record and collect as much as possible. So again, he went around, he did interviews, he took photographs, he collected songs and stories, documents and maps, and these were all published in this very rare journal that ran for 10 issues. And we're very fortunate indeed that the Price Library has 10, the whole set. And this was part of a larger effort conducted by what were called Jewish Historical Commissions. And they were established in Munich and in Poland. And really they were outgrowths of that thing that I mentioned earlier, whereby very, very early on, Jewish intellectuals had started to collect historical information prior to the war about the pogroms in Eastern Europe. And this is an outgrowth of that. So we can see that the collecting of Holocaust-related material and history of the Holocaust really starts in two ways. It started by the victims themselves, and it started by the Allies as they start to go through all of the archives and documents left by the Nazis. what then happens is one of the first major steps towards creating a place for all of these materials occurs in the newly fledged state of Israel, and even during the war. So the idea for the major museum that we now know as Yad Vashem was actually first conceived in 1942. But they had a lot of difficulties. There was difficulties with the conception, difficulties with how they were going to collect these documents. They set up various agents to travel to Europe to try and collect the documents, but they encountered many difficulties along the way. They encountered difficulties in getting to the archives held by the Allies. And it was where to put them as well. And it really wasn't until the 1950s, and you can see mid 1950s to late 1950s, that an actual institution was established, and that a place was created for these documents. Today, you can see I've listed there some of the statistics. It's an amazing a repository of over 179 million pages of documentation, and I won't read through them all. You can see them there on the slide. It really is a world-class leader in sort of Holocaust documentation. But if we start to think about, if we look at that and we see that, the collecting starts to take place in the war, but not seriously until the post-war period and in the displaced persons camps. And really, there isn't much of a public awareness until we get to the 1950s and even into the 1960s. And some of that public awareness comes about thanks to some major events and publications. The Anne Frank diary, which is published in 1952, it doesn't really gain notice for a little while until there's a New York Times review of it, and then the sales of the book start to go up. Then there was the Pulitzer Prize winning Broadway play in 1957. In 1961, we had the major Adolf Eichmann trial in Israel. And that's really probably the moment that the Holocaust becomes spoken about in many American homes, as this is broadcast across the news. It's a major news event. And it was covered by Hannah Arendt in the New Yorker. And then she publishes her book on her observations of the trial in 1963. And then, of course, another seminal work is Elie Wiesel's Night, but that actually doesn't gain massive popularity until way into the 90s. But he himself becomes quite well known and a household name thanks to his being appointed to President Jimmy Carter's Holocaust Commission in 1978. So what happens then is President Jimmy Carter, as I said, he puts together a commission, and Elie Wiesel leads the commission and compiles a report to him on the importance of having somewhere, a place to memorialize, remember, but also collect the experience of the Holocaust. So Elie Wiesel says, second, we cannot deny the victims the fulfillment of their last wish, their idée fixée to bear witness. What the merchant from Saloniki, the child from Lodz, the rabbi from Radzimin, the carpenter from Warsaw, and the scribe from Vilna had in common was the passion, the compulsion to tell the tale, or to enable someone else to do so. Every ghetto had its historians, every death camp its chroniclers, young and old, learned and unlearned. Everybody kept diaries, wrote journals, composed poems and prayers. They wanted to remember and to be remembered. They wanted to defeat the enemy's conspiracy of silence, to communicate a spark of fire that nearly consumed their generation, and above all, to serve as a warning to future generations. So I think that Elie Wiesel there really encapsulates this whole passion for collecting and recording and documenting and chronicling that had gone on from within the war and from after the war, and something that they wanted to spearhead with the creation of the United States Holocaust Memorial. And so this was one of the outcomes of the President's Commission. It was founded in 1980 and opened much later in 1993. And today, this is another major repository, sort of on the scale of Yad Vashem. 12,750 artifacts, 49 million pages of archival documents, 85,000 historical photographs, and so on and so forth. And they continue to collect. Today, they collect and they educate, and it's a place for memory and memorialization and learning. And one of the sort of foundational pillars of both places, both Yad Vashem and USHMM, is the collecting philosophy. So Holocaust scholarship in the United States really starts again in the 1960s and the 1970s, and it goes hand in hand with the development of Jewish studies. One of the first major books on the Holocaust was written by a historian called Raoul Hilberg. His Destruction of the European Jews provided the first comprehensive historical study of the Holocaust. In 1966, an American Jewish Yearbook notes that Jewish studies is now spreading around the United States as an accepted academic discipline. Prior to this, Jewish studies was really something that you did as part of the study of religion. So you studied Judaism and you studied the classical Jewish texts. But the idea of Jewish studies, Jewish history, Jewish culture really didn't take off until the 1960s. And then in the 1970s, the early 1970s, you've got the establishment and the growth of centers for Jewish studies in the US. And that's really where we come in the University of Florida. And with the establishment of the Center for Jewish Studies here in 1973. And in fact, we can proudly boast to be one of the first centers for Jewish studies in the nation. And really one of the first centers to provide a program in Holocaust studies at the undergraduate level. So if you've got a center for Jewish studies, you need a wonderful library to be able to teach with, to be able for researchers to be able to use, and to develop a whole program of scholarship. And UF was extremely lucky because the first director of Jewish studies, who was Barry Mesh, Professor Barry Mesh, he was the nephew of somebody who was collecting a massive library privately over in Chicago, and that was Rabbi Leonard Mishkin. And you can see him in the photograph there, he's on the left. And Rabbi Mishkin had collected Jewish studies books, Judaica books, Hebraica books from a very early age. He was very passionate about Jewish education, and he collected around 40,000 books in his home. And we don't have a photograph of what that looked like, but there's a wonderful book all about another collector over in the UK called Chimon Bransky, and he also had a 40,000 book collection in his home, and you can see an image of it there. Just gives you a little sense of what that would have looked like. Anyway, it was a fabulous collection. It covered the breadth and depth of Jewish history and culture from the biblical period to the modern day and across the world in a range of languages. And Mishkin also had an eye for collecting not only the unusual, ephemera and Festschriften. He was a major collector of Jewish periodicals, and his collection was one of the best Judaica periodical collections in the country at that time. And so the University of Florida hired the Harvard's bibliographer, Charles Berlin, to go and take a look at Mishkin's collection and report back on it. And Mishkin, and I've quoted from it here, said, with the acquisition of this collection, Florida would be catapulted into the ranks of the larger university collections in this field, and indeed would surpass universities with long-established programs. It would be a major collection of Judaica in the Southeast. But he also said that having such a collection imposed certain responsibilities on Florida, and that a really substantial Jewish studies program had to develop alongside it. In fact, only such a thing could justify the acquisition of this collection, which far exceeds the requirements of an undergraduate instruction and even of an undergraduate degree program. So you can see his report was absolutely glowing, and we were so fortunate to be able to purchase it. It came about thanks to, we won one of the first National Endowment for the Humanities Challenge grants, we had community help, and we also had the help of University of Florida leadership, which were fully behind the purchase of this major collection. It cost over $200,000 to acquire, which today would be something like buying a collection worth $1.5 million. So you can see that it was a big purchase. So today, when we look at our collection, which is now stands at around 140,000 volumes, and we look at what we have relating to the Holocaust, we see that we have around 7,669 books that have that subject in the catalogue, Holocaust. That doesn't actually include everything that pertains to the Holocaust. It's really only where the cataloger has noted this as a subject. So we have more than that. And really a good substantial collection, especially I did a comparison with the University of California, Berkeley, for example. They have, UC Berkeley has double the amount of books that the UF libraries have, and yet only about 2,000 more books than we do with the subject Holocaust. So you can see that we have a really substantial collection that supports the study of the Holocaust. We have 3,407 books on anti-Semitism, books on Holocaust historiography. We also have a very large collection of videos, that's film and documentaries, 75 journals relating to this subject matter, and then 60 dissertations on the subject too. Within the Price Library of Judaica, we have some really, really great primary sources for researchers and graduate students. And that ranges from periodicals to microfilm. We have law reports. We have the complete set of the military tribunals. We have archives and manuscripts, published accounts and reports, pamphlets and ephemera, and digital collections. And you can see there, I've just put an image of just some of the German titles of periodicals that we have in our collection, which is really, really huge. And many of them from this period, from the 1920s through to the 1950s. And here's one of our rare pieces. It's a yearbook, and it comes from the 1930s. And as far as we know, it's the only copy still available. And I don't know whether you can see just up in the the left corner of the left image, you'll see the Offenbach archival depot stamp. So that's how it got to us. It was a looted, originally looted from its owner. And this tells you everything. It was created by the community in Dresden, and it tells you everything about the community, their organizations, their associations. It's full of advertisements for local Jewish businesses, which is wonderful. It makes it a fantastic resource for knowing all about German Jewish life just prior to the advent of the Nazis gaining rise in Germany. And this is another one. This is one, and it's very interesting going back to that one. Many of these pieces I've digitized and put online, and after they've been online, I've had people reaching out to me interested in them and wanting to know more because they fit into some of the things that they're researching. So in this case, one of the compilers of the Dresden memory book over in Germany wanted to get good images of this because they didn't have a copy of it and they wanted to include it in their memory book. And here I digitized this rare newsletter that we have that was created in Landau, Pfalz, in Germany. It was created in the 1930s by a Rabbi Metzger, Rabbi Kurt Metzger, and you can see the beautiful synagogue there that he was the rabbi for. That synagogue was destroyed during Kristallnacht, and Metzger himself was arrested during Kristallnacht and taken to Buchenwald for several months. He was able to escape to America. He eventually became rabbi of Temple Beth El in New York. and was able in the end to go back to Landau and erect a monument in memory of the synagogue. But his newsletter contains very important information all about the community and their synagogue life. And we had about 6 issues of it. And then after I digitized it, somebody who was a member of his New York community reached out to me, saw that it was online, said, hey, we've got more of these, and we also have his sermons. Would you like them? And so we've acquired those as well, which is wonderful. Again, a lot of important part of collecting for the history of the Holocaust, I think, is collecting this pre-war material as it provides very important information about the lead up to the war and the state of the community beforehand, and really helps survivors and researchers when trying to trace people and communities as well. We collect a lot of anti-Semitic literature and propaganda. We have around 300 books, pamphlets, newsletters, and other ephemera. It was started by the former librarian, Robert Singerman. He managed the Judaica Library from its start in the 1970s through to 2004. And he is known as a major bibliographer, and one of his bibliographies is the Antisemitic Propaganda bibliography. And so hand in hand with compiling this, he started to collect. And we have many pieces from Germany in the 1930s, and one of those you can see on the left, called Juden über Deutschland, Jews over Germany, taking over Germany. We have the one on the far right. You see there's a cartoon image. It says Jews are not welcome here. And that's part of a book that was published by a young German school teacher called Elvira Bauer. She put together a book for children, and it has very colorful images like the one you see there, and a poem all about the glories of Nazi Germany and the evil of the Jews. And it was widely disseminated around the schools in Germany during the 1930s. After the war, it was used in the Nuremberg trials as evidence of Nazi propaganda. So it's great that we have an example of that in the collection. And then we've been collecting anti-Semitic literature that actually published in the post-war period, which you know, his anti-Semitism continues, and as it continues, we continue to collect it. Some of our special collections include this one. It's called the Emanuel Merdinger Papers. It was one of the first special collections that we gained, a manuscript and archival collection. And it came to us in a kind of roundabout way through a lady living in Gainesville who was going through the process of clearing out her garage. And she came across these materials in boxes, and it was something that was, these materials were entrusted to her by her neighbor, Emanuel Merdinger. He had no surviving family, and he wanted her to keep them and do something with them. He really wanted them to be used and known about. But sadly, she got caught up in life, and the things remained in boxes for a long time. Until one day she was attending a talk I gave about the library, and she realized that she could give this to our Judaica library and it would be a good home for it. And we set about immediately digitizing it and creating a special collection, because it includes Professor Merdinger's autobiography. It's in typescript, and it tells how he was born in Bukovina, and he studied and gained his degrees in chemistry in Ferrara in Italy, but then how he got caught up in the war and was transferred to various concentration camps, and gives an amazing insight into life in labor camps that perhaps were not so well known, and also how he survived them by distilling beer for the Germans, and it's an incredible story that he tells. Alongside that are many of his documents, including the one that you can see on the left. That's a reparations document, reparations card that he got in Ferrara. When he returned to Ferrara, he was given 4,000 lira in reparations, which is nothing. It's almost an insult to receive that amount in reparations, but there are those documents. There are all the documents that show how he had to sort of prove himself again in order to gain work as a professor in chemistry. He was an incredibly talented chemist, in fact, and was very much, when he came over to the USA, was very much involved in research on dialysis for kidney, dialysis machines for kidneys. So very important work, and very, very interesting history. And then recently, it's so nice to see an outcome to having collected this and having put it online, because it was discovered by this Francesco Paparella, who is he's a scientist and a historian of science living in Italy, in Ferrara in Italy. And Merdinger and his family, they were good friends prior to the war, and he'd always wondered what had happened to him. And so when he discovered all this material online, he was thrilled, and he worked with another scholar called Carlo Magri, and they've just last year published a book based on Merdinger's own autobiography, which is fabulous. It's so nice to see this outcome for one of our special collections. We also gained another collection, which we've called the Stuart family collection, and it came to us from another Gainesville resident called David Stuart. David Stuart is a local sports writer. You might know him. He wrote the Gator-Bait magazine for many, many years. And there's another story of discovery, sort of late in the day. He hadn't been in touch with his father for a long time. After he died in Israel, David's traveled over there to sort of deal with his belongings. And he found there so many boxes full of materials relating to the history of his family in Lithuania. Now, Irving Stuart, his father, had managed to escape Lithuania in the 1930s due to this sort of quirk of fate that he was born in Russia, and he could leave because of there was a quota of people who were allowed to leave who were of Russian birth. But that meant he got separated from his family. The rest of his family were trapped behind in the Kovno ghetto. And what's included in this collection are all the photographs of his family in Lithuania prior to the war, as well as many letters that have come from them from the Kovno ghetto. And they provide sort of incredible insights into, they're written in Yiddish, but they provide incredible insights into life in the ghetto before the record goes silent. So after the 1941, he no longer hears from them, and it takes him about really until many of these institutions start collecting documents, and until Yad Vashem is established and they establish a means by which you can start tracing relatives. It's only then that he discovers that they've been murdered in the Kovno ghetto. So this collection really tells you quite a story of how these materials are still coming to light, many still hidden, many people's experiences are of not knowing and wanting to find out what's happened to their families. And so that's a very poignant collection relating to that experience. Another collection that we recently acquired was from Professor Kenneth Walt, who is our distinguished professor of political science, emeritus now. His was another strange tale of discovery. His father, Henry Wald, never spoke to him about his grandparents. He never knew his grandparents. He knew that they died in Germany, but he knew nothing about them. And his father shared very little information about them. And it was, again, only after his father passed away that Ken was able to uncover this whole story. And he found in his father's possession this whole cache of letters between his father and his father's parents, and discovered that how they'd once owned an amazing department store in Germany, in this town in Germany. It was a well-loved department store, and they were very much part of the community. In fact, they were the only Jewish people in town at that point. But then after the rise of the Nazis, their store gets destroyed and looted during Kristallnacht. Ken's grandfather and father both get deported to Buchenwald for several months. Ken's father, Henry, he manages to escape Nazi Germany. They managed to get him here to America, where he settles in Lincoln, Nebraska. And he sends all these letters back and forth to his parents still in Germany, desperate to get them out. And you can see from the telegrams here in the collection how they're desperately trying to work out a passage through Cuba. And how very sadly that fails. And again, Henry Wald, it took some time before he knew what well, he actually never knew what happened to them. All he knew was that they were murdered. The trail went dead. There was no record of their actual murder. And so this is another important collection that's come to light and that we are now very privileged to own and make available to researchers and scholars and the students at UF as well. Another unusual collection that we have, and we've been getting quite a few of them, are these liberation photography collections. The first one we gained several decades ago, and it was put together by an actual photographer who served, somebody who actually served as a photographer with the US Army. His name was Mitchell Curtis. And he went in he took photographs of the liberation of certain concentration camps, and the Bergen-Belsen in particular. And as he went along, accompanying Eisenhower liberating these camps, Eisenhower was absolutely sickened by what they discovered, and he made it a policy to have these photographs copied many times over and distributed amongst the servicemen with the order that they had to take these home with them. And they had to make people aware of what had happened and what they'd seen. And Eisenhower was very adamant that what they'd discovered would never be forgotten. And sharing these liberation photographs were part of that. And I've shown you two images here, but many of them are extremely disturbing. And so we have a small collection of Mitchell Curtis's, which we call the Bergen-Belsen Photograph Collection. And then a couple of years after I became the curator of the collection, I was approached by our provost, Joe Glover, because his family had, he and his brothers had discovered amongst his father's belongings after he passed some photographs of the Holocaust. His father's called Robert Glover, and we've called it the Robert Glover Holocaust Photographs Collection. And it caused some confusion. They didn't understand because as far as they knew, he'd never been involved in the liberation of camps. And so, and he wasn't much of a photographer either. So how was it that he'd taken these photographs? Well, we were able to show, thanks actually to the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum website, where they've got several pages dedicated to this subject, that this again was part of this Eisenhower policy of giving copies of photographs to servicemen to keep and to show to people when they got home. And so that's precisely what Robert Glover did. He served in the army, and he brought these photographs home with him, and he kept them in his possession throughout his lifetime. And then we have a third collection, which we call the Edward J. Lavinia collection. And that's another example of one of these servicemen keeping the photographs that have been given to him. In his case, it's an even stranger story, because the photographs of concentration camps that he kept in an album. And they're very oddly placed. The album, when you open it, there's lots of beautiful photographs of Germany. And then there's some photographs of him posing in places that he visited in Germany while he was a serviceman there. And then right in the middle of the album are these very, very disturbing photographs. And then it continues on with more beautiful photographs of Germany. So it's very strange. And so I decided that we would keep it, and it would help us perhaps learn more about what these photographs meant to these soldiers, what they did with them, how they dealt with them, how they were interpreted, and how we can interpret them today. So that's why we have these liberation photography collections. We also collected, this was a collection I actually purchased from the United Kingdom. And we called it the Richard M. Feist papers because they were largely gathered by this gentleman called Richard Feist. Richard Feist was a Jewish serviceman serving with the British Army. And then after the war, he became part of the 55 Search Bureau of the British Army on the Rhine. And his job was to help track down missing persons in the aftermath of the Holocaust. And so the papers that he collected as part of his personal belongings were many of the letters that he received from people around the world searching for their relatives. And you can see an example here on the right. This one is actually coming from the World Jewish Congress, and they're writing to him, asking him if he has lists of displaced Jews and where, and if he has addresses to send transmittal letters. And then on the left, you can see some of the addresses of places that are dealing with all of this, the searching. And it's a quite incredible archive. It's not massive, it's fairly small, and yet it contains a lot of information to show you just what an enormous and very emotionally devastating task this was to track down missing relatives. We also collect Yiska books or memorial books. These were put together by survivors of the Holocaust, and again, very similar to this whole idea, this whole historical consciousness that had developed during the early 20th century in Eastern Europe, and continuing that idea of collecting eyewitness accounts, interviews, memories of places, towns and people, biographies, maps and photographs, and then there are lists of those who have perished. And so the survivors sort of got together in groups where they related to one another from similar hometowns to create these books. They're very large format books. They're very heavy, and they're full of all of these materials. And so they were only really ever produced, printed about 50 at a time, because they were produced by the Jewish communities in the post-war period, and they were published by them. And so they had limited resources to publish them. And really, they were only for distribution among the members of the group. And so today, these Yiska books are very rare indeed. And there are several collections around the country, probably about 1,040 titles published altogether. And we have a collection in the Price Library of Judaica, about 700 titles, including some that are quite rare. And I often get requests for digitizing them. One of them was this one from Augusto, Yiska book for Augusto and its surrounds. This was actually the place in Poland from which the Price family originated, and they were very interested in having a digitized copy of this so they could learn more about their family's origins. And here I can just showing you some of the examples of what you would find in a Yiska book, maps and the photographs, and the biographies and the memories. And so they're an incredible resource. And very, very of great interest today, because a lot of people are, thanks to the internet and the greater availability of resources that have been collected, a lot of people interested in tracing their relatives and learning about their histories, a lot of genealogical projects. And in fact, excuse me, there's one huge genealogical project known as Jewish Gen, and that database incorporates many of these Yiska books, and is helping to translate them. And the massive interest that this has gained has led to now English translations of these books. So slowly, we're now getting to be able to get to the contents of these books in English. A collection that we got just a couple of years ago has a sort of tangential relationship to Holocaust history, and this is what we titled the Jose Moscovitz Anti-Semitism Collection. Jose Moscovitz himself was a Holocaust survivor. He was born in Hungary, and as a young teenager was taken to several labor camps. He escaped from those, and he was placed in the same Hungarian prison as the famous Hannah Shanesh, and so had many sort of experiences during the Holocaust. Finally, after the war, he's able to get to Buenos Aires in Argentina, where he becomes the president of the survivors, the Jewish Association of Survivors of Nazi Persecution. And he trains himself to become a lawyer, and helps other survivors across Latin America seeking reparations from Nazi Germany. So that's his job during the daytime. He also was somebody who was instrumental in helping Mossad set up safe houses during the capture of Eichmann, safe houses for Mossad agents to hide while they were trying to capture Eichmann. In the 1970s, this was the period of, it was the dirty war period in Argentina, and Jews were among the largest number of disappeared people in Argentina. And so it comes, including actually Jose Moscovitz's daughter, who is kidnapped during this period, and a ransom is asked for from him. And so this is now come to his attention that not only has he survived the Holocaust, he's having to face anti-Semitism once again. And so he put together a survey of questions, very much in this sort of Jewish historical consciousness of questioning, creating questionnaires and surveys to try and gather together historical information. And what he does this time is, rather than surveying fellow Jews, or even surveying sort of regular people on the street to see what their opinion is, he decides he's going to reach out to what we would term today as influencers. So he reaches out to world influencers and sends them his survey. And he compiled a list of 5,000 leading politicians, artists, scholars, scientists, writers, etc. And he received from them, 1,000 responses. And that's the collection that we were able to gain for the University of Florida. And it's really a fascinating and amazing collection, because it has a vast array of opinions on the subject of anti-Semitism from people from all around the world. And unlike surveys that we engage in today, where we might get a survey on email and we click delete, or if we get a survey, we might answer yes, yes, no. These people were typing lengthy answers to his queries. And one of those was from the leading Russian-British philosopher Isaiah Berlin. And Isaiah Berlin writes back to Moscovitz in January 1977, a very lengthy and very interesting letter all about his insights into anti-Semitism. And so this is just one wonderful example of the rich content that's in this collection. And again, I was so pleased that people have already reached out to us about this, including Isaiah Berlin's biographer who is producing a massive collection of all of his letters. And Isaiah Berlin wrote hundreds of letters. And so our Moscovitz letter is now included in this collection, the Berlin online collection. We've also, as I said, I've already said this quite a bit going through, we've digitized a great deal of our collections, and we're still doing that. But we're also digitizing pieces that come to us that they're sort of only come to us in digital form, or only come to us for digitization. And one of those was, again, from a local lady, a survivor called Sarah Stein, who sadly passed away back in 2019. And her testimony, her oral history interview is really so important, because it's one of these experiences of the Holocaust that are not that often shared. In fact, she kept silent on her experiences right until 2018, because she felt, for some reason, she felt that she hadn't survived. Because she hadn't been in a concentration camp, she wasn't a survivor. Nevertheless, she and her family had a terrible experience trying to survive as they escaped across Eastern Europe, hiding in places, experiencing the freezing cold, experiencing starvation. It was a terrible, terrible time, and she captures it in her interview that we've now got online, together with this only photograph she's got of her relatives prior to the war. We've also engaged in a lot of collaborative digital collecting. That is to say, we collaborate with other institutions to share material online. And this came about as one of our recent initiatives, which was a National Endowment for Humanities Challenge grant. And the initiative was focused on collecting Florida Jewish history and Latin American and Caribbean Jewish history. And as part of that, we went to the synagogue in Havana, Cuba, to digitize their library, their biblioteca, which is an incredible collection of books that they've collected from the early 20th century through to the sort of dispersal of the community in the 1960s. And it included this incredible first-person account of the Buchenwald concentration camp. And it was the first account ever published, and it was actually published in Havana in 1939 in Yiddish. And we've been able to provide free online access to this through our digital collections and through our collaboration with Cuba, but also with other collections. We've done digitizing of material in Mexico and in Argentina, hundreds of thousands of Jewish newspapers, many of them from this period and before the war, capturing and post-war as well, sort of capturing the whole the history from before, through, and after. And then we have, again, what we call born digital collections, where we've only been given something that's, we've been given digitized material, and we've put it online. And this came to us from a local temple in Orlando. And it was an anthology that they put together, stories of their community members who'd experienced the Holocaust. And they were very, very pleased and excited that we were able to provide a platform for this so that it could be shared very, very widely indeed. And so that's something that we're very keen to do and will continue to do as well. So that's also part of our collections. And then in addition to that, finally, if you come and visit the Judaica suite, which holds all of our special collections, you'll also be able to see that we have numerous artworks that commemorate, memorialize the Holocaust. We have, so the Judaica suite was designed by Kenneth, who's very well known for his Holocaust memorial in Miami. And we have a small maquette model of that in the suite. We also have things like this artist book by Karen Boldner. It's called German Jew. Karen Boldner grew up in Germany right after the war, a a young girl in Germany after the war, and that caused her to forever sort of question her identity as a German and as a Jew. And here you can see she's created this artist book, this sort of split head, this split personality of where she's not sure what her identity is, a problem for a lot of people growing up Jewish in post-war Europe. And then the other image on the right you can see is from a collection of Holocaust prints we got from a local artist called David Crown. David Crown was actually a British doctor, an MD, who came over here to America, and then when he retired, started to indulge his second passion, which was art. And he was the president of the Mezzotint Society and an expert printmaker, beautiful prints. And he didn't get involved. He was a young man during World War II, but he wasn't enlisted in the army because they told him, they advised him against it. And so he always had this sense of guilt. And then later in life, he started to have very bad nightmares about it, with images coming to his head. And so he decided to commit them to print. And we have these 26 prints that he created that are very, very startling images. And in fact, we've used them in classes when we talk about Holocaust memory and memorialization with students at UF. And finally, just this year, I created for the first time a research guide. Hopefully will be of use to scholars and students at UF, but also everywhere, actually, because I've put together as many resources as I could find relating to the Holocaust from around the world, with links to send you to all of the pages. And then just here on the left, I've got some links to some of our resources if you're interested in learning more about our collections. And just please email me if you have any questions about the collection and want to use the collection. And so that's it. That's my my talk concluded, and I'll look forward to talking to you if you have collections about this presentation. Thank you.
Question for you.
Yes.
Are you still giving tours of the library and talking about the the special archives and especially the archives on the Holocaust?
Absolutely, I'm happy to do tours. It really depends on people's comfort level at this time. So if you're happy, we'll take groups, we'll take individuals, however you want to do it. Just contact me and let me know if you want to come for a tour, and I'm really happy to do it. And I can take you around and show you some of these pieces that I've mentioned today and others too.
Because we reinstated our transportation.
Right.
If people are interested, we probably could get a bus there, where we did before.
Right.
And if you would, give a little talk, and I guess you have a video still of your archives, but you could also point them out.
Yeah, and there's nothing like seeing them sort of live. I mean, I was hoping that when we first planned this, it was going to be in person, and then there's nothing like being able to show you the materials up close. So yeah, I'd love to have a group come over. That would be wonderful.
Right. Okay. Well, if people are interested, let Julie know, and if we have enough, we'll take a bus over there. And we'll work something out with Rebecca. We'll work out a time and date that makes sense for everyone. Do we have any questions, comments? Anybody want to ask Rebecca a question or
It says there, Rick Gold has raised his hand.
Rick?
Thanks for a wonderful talk.
Oh,
Just
you're welcome.
so many important resources.
Thank
And
you.
thank you for your insights too.
Thank you.
I just had a question about the sources of many of the Holocaust documents. I read a book called The Book Smugglers about the creation of the Yearbook collection.
Right.
The fact that a lot of the documents had to be hidden not only from the Nazis, but also from the Lithuanian Soviet government. And I'm just wondering if you have any stories that you can tell us about how some of the documents that you talked about made their way to the various collections.
Right. Yeah, you're absolutely right. So many of these stories are complex and involved and tragic, and the fact that we've managed to assemble so much in so many of the libraries is a miracle indeed, and thanks to so many dedicated people. And sadly, many got lost along the way. Yeah, as I said, I think a lot of the pieces in our collection have come about as the result of some sort of amazing serendipity, things sort of held in people's homes, some of them not realizing their importance, others not knowing what to do with them. Sometimes many of our documents are in Yiddish, and people just don't know what they are. Thankfully, they hang on to them, but they have no idea of what to do with them, what they are. So, for instance, the Irving Sturt collection that we got, it has these letters from the Kovno ghetto. David had no idea what they were. He just had some inkling that they could be important, and came to us for help on that. I mean, sadly, we're not able to sort of serve as a translation service. My Yiddish is very basic indeed, very, very basic. And it's not something we're able to do, but I'm always excited to take in collections, digitize them where possible to help people get to translators and get the help that they need. I would say that, and so I'm not an expert on that whole history, but I've been reading this fantastic book. Can you see it? Am I holding it up so you can see it? It's called Collect and Record. And it's by, I don't know if you've come across this, but it's by Laura Jokush. It's Oxford University Press, and it's an amazing account of how people collected the material in this early period and how all of these things managed to survive and eventually make it into collections around the world. And I would say she's the person with all those great stories. She's spent many years of scholarly study on the subject. I hope that answers a little bit.
We have compliments in the chat, but any other questions or comments? I don't see anything else, Ellen.
Certainly can reach out to me afterwards if anything occurs to you about the subject or wanting to know more about our collections.
Rebecca, great talk.
Thank you.
Great
It was a pleasure to
insight.
talk to you all.
Great insight about your collections and how you go about doing so and digitizing them.
I hope it provides some sort of context as well for some of the other talks you've been hearing and how they go about putting together their scholarship through the things that we have in the library and have collected around the world.
I think Barbara had her hand up. Barbara, did you have a question? Somebody's hand
Oh,
is up.
there's the clap icon.
Thank you.
It's a clap.
Thank you.
You have some very good comments in the chat.
No, that's lovely. I'll have a look.
Well, thank you, everyone.
Thank
Just
you.
a reminder, we will not have a session next week, but we will have one the week after, and there's been a slight change, so I will send out a news flash to all the participants. But thank you again, Rebecca, for being with us, and thank you, Ellen.
Thank you.
Bye.
Stay well.
You too. Bye.